Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's always an honour to rise in this House on behalf of the people of Parry Sound Muskoka to talk about the issues that matter to them. Obviously, the affordability of life is a key issue in Parry Sound Muskoka. Trying to find a home is a big issue. Housing is probably the #1 issue in Parry Sound Muskoka. It's not just the big cities of Toronto and Vancouver where the tent cities are growing. It's small cities, small rural communities as well. People can't find a home to live. In fact, a few weeks ago, I spoke to a business owner in Huntsville who just hired a new welder. Was very excited about it, but that welder quit a few weeks later because they simply couldn't find a place to live in Huntsville within his budget. It's a story I hear over and over and over again. People are making the right choices. They get a good education. They work hard. They pay their bills. And yet they struggle to put a roof over their head in the places they want to be, in the places they need to be because of the housing crisis. And yes, in case there is any question, it is a crisis. So M59 recognizes the need for special consideration for some of the most vulnerable in our society, individuals with non-visible disabilities. It calls on the government to work with stakeholders to improve access. And of course, Conservatives, we support this, and we do so happily, but with some cause for hesitation. Because, of course, we've watched this government's record for 8 years. And particularly when it comes to housing, the housing situation under 8 years of this government is now worse than ever. House prices have doubled. Rent has doubled. After 8 years of this government, the promise of transformational national housing strategy, the housing situation in Canada has never been worse. The CEO of the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, Romy, had this to say at the Affordable Housing Summit hosted by the Scotiabank. Things are at a crisis point for the middle class, but also particularly for vulnerable Canadians. Inflation is still not under control. The Bank of Canada is increasing interest rates, and many economists are forecasting a modest recession for the first half of 2023. Many households, especially first-time buyers, are taking on debt that is excessive. That's a real concern, especially during an economic downturn, because when people are highly leveraged, it creates a lot of instability in the economy, but also pain for households. Now, Madam Speaker, I don't know why the Minister of Housing won't acknowledge what his officials seem to acknowledge, that there is a crisis. They even acknowledge that inflation is still out of control and interest rates continue to rise. And of course, Madam Speaker, this has real-life consequences for Canadians. High interest rates, made worse by liberal inflationary borrowing, mean that too many Canadians are paying higher mortgages, but not paying down any of the debt. Many Canadians going to renew their mortgage this summer, this fall, may find out that they can't afford their house anymore. That's not how it's supposed to work. That's not the sunny ways that Canadians were promised. That's not a transformational housing policy. Canadians were promised if you work hard, you go to school, you get an education, you pay your bills, that you will get ahead. And that's not what's happening. Too many Canadians cannot afford to get into a home. And so now we have a government that has announced a housing accelerator fund. The Minister of Housing seems to have figured out that it's a supply issue. He said, in fact, we recognize that the key to increasing housing affordability is to boost the supply of housing available to Canadians. Well, that's great after 8 years. So for 8 years now, the government has been subsidizing demand. So $500 rent subsidy checks and savings account that actually, for first-time homebuyers, makes things more expensive. All of this borrowing drives inflation, drives interest rates. Historic inflation, historic interest rates, all of which puts homes further and further away for Canadians. And so this accelerator fund is supposed to create 100,000 new units for the cool price tag of $4 billion, Madam Speaker. So let's put that into context. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says that Canada needs 5.8 million new housing units by 2030 to make homes affordable again. So 100,000 spread across this entire country is a very tiny drop in what I see as an ocean-sized bucket. So forgive me if I find this program just a little bit insulting. How can we expect the government to get this right when they've had 8 years and hadn't got it right yet? When NIMBY local councillors here in Ottawa blocked 80 new units from being built, the minister didn't lift a finger. He doesn't want to take on the NIMBYs. He doesn't want to challenge municipalities. He doesn't want to hold them accountable either. He may think that touring the country and announcing a few dozen units here and a few dozen units there is solving the problem. But Canadians know the truth. It's not. So now we want to trust the new transformational housing plan, but of course their first one made things worse. And they're already failing Canadians who have disabilities when it comes to housing. And I can give you an example from Parry Sound, Muskoka. Community Living South Muskoka supports over 400 individuals and their families living with developmental disabilities in Parry Sound, Muskoka, in the south end of Muskoka. They dreamed of building a housing complex to support families, to support these folks. With wraparound supports, they were going to put a roof over their head. They were going to help them live healthy, active, engaged lives in the community. They had a beautiful piece of property. They had the drawings done. They had the municipality on board. The zoning was done. They had the District of Muskoka supporting. They even had private support. And then they got to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. And the endless applications, the delays, the red tape. They gave up. They gave up and they quit and they sold the land. They had a dream of helping Canadians living in South Muskoka with developmental disabilities, and the bureaucracy crushed it because they just couldn't get through the quagmire of bureaucracy. Covenant House in Vancouver built a beautiful new building. They got $12 million from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. They raised a lot of money privately. They had the support of the local municipality, private donations, and even a celebrity endorsement from Ryan Reynolds. Of course, it cost them $1 million in consulting fees to get $12 million from the CMHC. Now imagine an organization like Covenant House in Vancouver with all those resources, with a prime ministerial endorsement, a celebrity endorsement, still it cost them $1 million. There's no hope for small community organizations like Community Living. Madam Speaker, healthcare workers are living in tents. Students are living in homeless shelters. $2,500 a month to rent a one-bedroom apartment in Toronto. Government delays, permits, red tape, they add over $600,000 to every single residential housing unit in the city of Vancouver. We have the lowest number of homes in the G7. 9 out of 10 young people who don't own a home in this country believe they never will. In 2022, on average, 3 people suffering from homelessness died every week in the city of Toronto. We have a housing minister who is unwilling to call this what it is, a crisis. Madam Speaker, Conservatives understand what's going on. We understand that it is a crisis. We do not accept the status quo because it is a failure. We do not accept the NIMBY city councillors who reject more housing. We do not accept young people being locked out of home ownership. We reject the status quo, Madam Speaker. We embrace a pro-housing agenda, and we will deliver housing for all Canadians by leveraging federal funding to cities and holding them accountable to get the job done. We will incentivize the private sector by removing roadblocks that delay construction. We will push to densify our communities with the support, the infrastructure dollars to support making that happen. The Conservative plan provides the incentive and the accountability for municipalities to get the job done. We will withhold federal checks to municipalities that give in to the NIMBYs, and we will provide housing bonuses for cities who are committed and dedicated to streamlining approvals and boosting home building. Madam Speaker, Conservatives say yes in my backyard. Conservatives say yes to building more homes faster. Madam Speaker, Conservatives say we'll bring it home. Thank you.